We're on a road to nowhere. Come on inside. Taking that ride to nowhere. We'll take that ride. I'm feeling okay this morning, and you know, we're on the road to paradise. Here we go, here we go. There's a city in my mind. Come along and take that ride, and it's alright, baby, it's alright. And it's very far away, but it's growing day by day, and it's alright, baby, it's alright. Would you like to come along, and you can help me sing this song, and it's alright, baby, it's alright. There's a city in my mind. Come along and take that ride, and it's alright, baby, it's alright. And it's very far away, but it's growing day by day, and it's alright, baby, it's alright. They could tell you what to do, but they'll make a fool of you, and it's alright, baby, it's alright.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. As you guys know, I'm kind of a little excited for tonight's show. This is so rad, and I'm so honored and excited to have Mr. John KIRiakou. You are a journalist, an author, and a former intelligence officer. So I know I thought of this while I was prepping. Well, first, let me. Why don't you introduce yourself on a deeper level than I just did?
Oh, thanks. There's not much more to say. I'm a former CIA officer. I've sort of become something of a CIA dissident, I suppose. My claim to fame is I blew the whistle on the CIA's torture program, something I've never, ever regretted doing. The price was high, but that's okay. Glad that I was able to do it, and happy to be with you. Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. So something I was thinking about while I was, coming up with my questions and such, it struck me funny because a lot of us on Twitter who, people disagree with, like every time they disagree with someone, they call them an op or CIA. And yep. I was just wondering if you've seen that, and like, yes. Is that weird to you?
People still call me CIA. People say stupid things like once CIA, always CIA. Right. And it's like, oh, I'll be sure to mention that to Ed Snowden next time I talk to him.
Right.
Or to Jeffrey Sterling or somebody like that. It's just, you get that nonsense all the time. And it's always from people who just are so intellectually lazy that they have nothing else to argue.
Right. Absolutely. That's exactly what I say. They're lazy. Absolutely. Bring on the pejoratives. I have no discussion in me. So I want to kind of give people, I'm sure most of my viewers know at least somewhat of who you are, but I want to kind of go back. And actually, it's really interesting. You were actually recommended for the CIA job through your college professor in grad school?
Yes, he recruited me into the CIA. I was in grad school at George Washington University, getting a master's degree in legislative affairs. I just kind of figured that I would end up on Capitol Hill someday, or maybe in the Foreign Service, maybe as a lobbyist. And I was taking this class called The Psychology of Leadership by with Dr. Gerald Post. And he was an eminent psychiatrist. He used to be on TV all the time. He had written a dozen books, like deep kinds of books. And one day after class, it's kind of a longish story, but I'll make it very, very short. But one day after class, he asked to see me in his office. And when I went down, yeah,
Uh-oh.
when I went down there, he told me that he was not really a professor there. He was a CIA officer undercover as a professor there. And he was looking for people who might fit into the CIA's culture. And this was on the analytics side. He actually had founded one of the CIA's analytic divisions. And would I be interested in joining the CIA? The truth of the matter is that I was getting married just 6 weeks later, and I had no job, and I had no prospects for a job. And so I said, sure. I wanted to see the world anyway. I was interested in public service. I hadn't given it a whole ton of thought, but I said, sure. And it's not that simple. You have to pass a whole bunch of tests: written, oral, financial, polygraph, security. But eventually I found myself at the CIA.
Wow. So, and you definitely did work with different countries. So where, did you primarily serve in DC, or did you get to travel?
Oh, the CIA sent me to 70 different countries, and I lived in a half a dozen different countries. But my specialty was the Middle East. My bachelor's degree was in Middle Eastern studies, and the CIA taught me to speak Arabic fluently. And so my first overseas assignment was working with the Kuwaiti royal family during the Iraqi occupation of Kuwait. So I was with them in Saudi Arabia. I went into Kuwait with the Marines on Liberation Day and served there. Then I spent 2 years in Bahrain, went back to headquarters to work on Iraq. And then I got bored about 7 years into it, like very bored. And so I did something that was very, very unusual. I switched from analysis to counterterrorism operations and worked then at the CIA's Counterterrorism Center. So then I served in Athens for 2 years. I served as the chief of counterterrorism operations in Pakistan after 9/11. And then I finished up my career at the United Nations in New York.
Wow, that's incredible. 70 countries. Oh my gosh. I knew about some of them, but wow, did you have time to even explore, or was it work 24/7?
Oh, I always made time to explore, which used to drive my colleagues crazy. If you're going to be, for example, if you're going to be in Damascus and you don't know if you'll ever be in Damascus again, then for God's sake, take a day, hire a private tour guide, and go see all the stuff that you should see in Damascus. Otherwise, I knew guys who would never leave the hotel room except to go to work. And then they'd go back to the hotel. I'm like, are you crazy? So yeah, every country has weekends, right? Everybody wants to be off for the weekend. So if you happen to find yourself in some country, let's say you're in Jordan for the weekend, rent a car and drive to Petra. Or if you're in Cairo, go see the pyramids, or go on a safari, or do something. You can't just sit in a hotel. Every hotel looks exactly the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm glad to hear you say that. Your story is so interesting. I think one of the things that really stood out to me while first hearing about your story and doing additional research is I didn't, and maybe I'm the only one, but I didn't know that the CIA allowed people, lack of a better term, with them to go on news channels. I didn't know that happened.
No, they don't ever.
Right.
Unless you're the director. Yeah, you can't be an active duty CIA officer and go on the news. You can't be an active duty CIA officer and speak to the media in any capacity unless you're the director or deputy director or in the office of public affairs.
So, that being said, did you know what you were disclosing could absolutely get you, well, first of all, fired and also imprisoned?
Oh, no, I was never fired. I left the CIA in 2003, and I went on ABC News in 2007, in December of 2007. So I was already in the private sector. I knew it was going to be controversial, but I didn't think it was going to be life altering. And I'll tell you what, it shouldn't have been life altering because, well, for a couple of reasons. First, it's actually illegal in this country to classify a crime. If something is a criminal act, like torture, it is illegal to classify the program for the purpose of keeping the information from the American people. I believed then, I believe now, that the torture program was a crime. Not just a crime in the United States as a violation of the Federal Torture Act of 1946, or even internationally as a violation of the United Nations conventions against torture. But it was a war crime and a crime against humanity. And so it was clear to me that this program was illegal. I waited for 5 years, 5.5, for somebody to come out and say something. And nobody did. And so finally I did in December of 2007. Now, as you might imagine, the CIA the very next day filed what's called a crimes report against me with the FBI, saying that I had disclosed classified information. The FBI investigated me from December of 2007 to December of 2008, and then determined that I had not committed a crime. So, I mean, I kind of knew that I was gonna win because I hadn't committed a crime. But 3 weeks later, Barack Obama became president, and he brought John Brennan on as the Deputy National Security Advisor for counterterrorism. John and I always hated each other. And John asked Attorney General Eric Holder to secretly reopen the case against me. I had no idea that they had reopened the case. I had no idea that my phones were tapped, that my emails were being intercepted, that I was being followed by teams of FBI agents. And then finally, 4 years, a little bit more than 4 years after I blew the whistle, I was arrested and charged with 5 felonies, including 3 counts of espionage. Now, I hadn't committed espionage, and they eventually dropped those charges. But to make the whole thing go away, I had to take a plea to a lesser charge.
Wow. So what did should you have not plead out, what were they offering?
Good question. And there's actually background to that. So when I was first arrested, they were seeking 45 years in prison. And I said, I'm not going to do 45 minutes. I didn't do anything wrong. And then they came back. It was on a Monday, and they said, take a guilty plea to an espionage charge, and you do 10 years. I turned it down. On Wednesday, they came down to 8 years. I turned it down. And on Friday, all in the same week, they came down to 5 years. My lead attorney was the legendary Plato Kacharis. And he said that he had been an attorney in Washington, D.C. for 52 years, an attorney for some of the biggest names in modern American history. And he had never seen them come down in time in their offers. And I said, well, why are they doing that? And very quickly he said to me, because they have a shit case and they know it's shit. We're going to trial. And I said, okay, we're going to trial. They waited I'm going to say 10 more months. And then they came down to 3.5 years. And I said, no. And then they said, all right, best and final offer, 2.5 years, you do 23 months. And I had until noon the next day to make the decision. My wife and I, now my ex-wife, we stayed up all night long talking about this. And I decided to turn it down. I said, naively, as it turned out, that if I just can get in front of a jury, they're going to see how ridiculous this is and how punitive it is. And I'm going to win because I hadn't done anything wrong. So I emailed my lawyers and I said, I'm turning it down. Let's go to trial. They emailed me back. I had 11 lawyers. 3 of them emailed me back saying, we're coming to the house. So they came to my house. It was 7 o'clock in the morning, very upset that I had decided to turn this down. And so one of them, the one who I actually liked and respected the most, got right in my face, like right in my face. And he said, you know what your problem is? Your problem is you think this is about justice, and it's not about justice. It's about mitigating damage. Take the deal. So I said, all right, if I don't take the deal and I'm found guilty, what am I realistically looking at? And he said 12 to 18 years. And then he said, listen, I like you. You're a nice guy. This could be a blip in your life, or it could be the defining event in your life. Make it the blip. And so I took the deal. Now, later on, of course, I read studies and investigative reports showing that the federal government wins 98.2% of its cases. Wow. So do you roll the dice knowing that you have a 1.8% chance of winning? I had 5 kids. I couldn't take that chance.
Wow. And would it would not have been a jury case?
Oh, sure. See, and that's another thing. I'm glad you brought it up. My best friend's wife has an uncle who happened to be O.J. Simpson's jury consultant. So as a favor, he agreed to consult on my case. So we got him a security clearance through the Justice Department. He flew up to Washington from Dallas. He went through 15,000 pages of classified discovery. And I'll never forget the meeting that we had with him and all the lawyers together. He said, listen, if we were in any other district in America, I'd say, let's go for it. We're going to win. But the Eastern District of Virginia, your jury is going to be made up of people from or with relatives from the CIA, the FBI, the Pentagon, the Department of Homeland Security, and 24 intelligence and defense contractors. He said, you don't have a prayer. Take the deal.
No.
And so I took the deal.
Absolutely. It's so vague, but what was prison like? Did you have people in prison who knew why you were in there and thought, you know what, you're a fucking traitor? Like, what was it like?
The guards were the only ones who called me a traitor, but they had their heads up their asses anyway. You know what saved me was there was one guy in the prison, Mark Lanzalotti, God bless him. He's still one of my best friends in the world. Mark was Italian.
I was going to say, it sure sounds like it.
Yeah. Italian who was friends with people who had last names like Gambino and Lucchese and Bonanno and Colombo. So Mark, for whatever reason, Mark followed my case. And he saw 4 days before I arrived in the New York Times that I was going to be sent to the federal prison in Loretto, Pennsylvania. And Mark took it on himself to go to every single one of the Italians. And there were, say, 24 of them, and explain to them the difference between an FBI agent and a CIA officer. FBI agents are cops and rats. CIA officers are overseas keeping us safe from terrorists. And so when I arrived in shock, because I thought I was going to go to the minimum security work camp, and instead, just to screw me, they put me in the actual prison, which was 2 levels higher security. The Italians welcomed me with open arms. One of the things that I learned early on, and I wrote a book about this called called Doing Time Like a Spy. how the CIA taught me to survive and thrive in prison. One of the things that I learned very, very early on, just in the first couple days, is that prison is just a collection of gangs. And if you aren't in a gang, and I wasn't in a gang, but you have to learn how to negotiate your way through these gangs. Well, I was sort of adopted by the Italians. And so, when word got around that I was with the Italians, yeah, I was in good shape.
That's excellent. One of our viewers, Vegan Succubus, we are healthcare organizers and activists. And we were speaking earlier because I do, I've interviewed several prisoners and they all have complaints about how their health issues are ignored, things like that. So I digress, but how
no. You're not digressing. You're not digressing. This is a very, very important issue. Very important. Your health is going to worsen in prison, period. There's almost nothing you can do to stop that. Now, if you go into prison with pre-existing conditions, you're going to get worse. In some cases, dramatically worse. I went into prison with controlled diabetes, type 2 diabetes. I came out of prison with uncontrolled type 2 diabetes, 35 pounds heavier. And it's because you're given this all carb, all the time diet, whether you like it or not. And I'll give you some examples too. I wrote about this from prison and smuggled it out. And Arianna Huffington, who at the time owned the Huffington Post, published it. But my first full day in prison was a Friday, and Friday's fish day. And one of the Italians said, "Oh, today's Friday, it's fish day." And I said, "Oh, that's good. I like fish." And he said, "Buddy, you're not going to want to eat this fish. We call it sewer trout." And I said, "Oh, okay. I'll stay away from it." Well, when I got down to the cafeteria, I saw these boxes that were stacked up behind the line and the food line, and the boxes were all clearly marked. They said, "Alaskan cod, product of China, not for human consumption, feed use only." And they were flopping it on everybody's plates. That was one incident. Another incident was every Wednesday was taco night. And I'll tell you, after 2 years of these so-called tacos, I've not been able to force Mexican food down my throat ever since. And I mean like 10 years now. So it was the most disgusting thing you can ever imagine eating. Well, one day we got an all hands memo from the warden saying, "Sorry, everybody, but it turns out that the tacos we served you 6 weeks ago were mismarked. It was marked ground beef. It wasn't ground beef. It was dog food. The mistake was made at the meat packing plant. It wasn't our mistake. They've been fined, and the money went to the National Treasury." Okay, disgusting. But the shame is not even that we were fed dog food. The shame is that we didn't even have any idea that it was dog food because it tasted the same as it did every single Wednesday. One other thing. If you go to breakfast, you have your choice between this lukewarm brown water that they call coffee or a glass of milk. And lunch and dinner, you have a choice between water and Kool-Aid. Well, I never touched the Kool-Aid because I had diabetes, but people are drinking Kool-Aid. And finally, as the level of the Kool-Aid is going down in the tank, there's a dead rat at the bottom of the Kool-Aid that people had been drinking for days. And, we're just one of 110 federal prisons across America. This happens everywhere. It happens all the time. The food is not human grade food. It's animal grade food, but it's cheap. And so if they're trying to cut costs, not just at the federal level, but in state prisons and in local jails, where do they cut costs? They cut food and they cut medication. That's how they save money. And then because we've given ourselves this for-profit prison system, they cut it that much more. You know, there's a maximum security penitentiary here in Virginia that's used as a transportation point for both state and federal prisoners called Red Onion Prison. And they haven't even had toilet seats in 10 years because it costs $10 to buy a new toilet seat. So why spend $10 on a toilet seat when the company can put it in their pockets?
What do you think would change if and when we ever got rid of for-profit prisons? How do you think that would change the system as a whole?
I think it might make prison healthcare slightly incrementally better, which is great, but it's not going to cure anything. What we need to do is learn a lesson from some of our Western European friends and allies, you know, like Germany and Norway and Sweden, where they know that in order to reduce recidivism, you have to offer education and training. Well, we phased out education and training in 1979. And so, you know, time used to be when you go to prison and you're like, okay, well, I can learn to be a plumber or an electrician or to fix engines or something. And we don't do that at all anymore. So, you know, if you're a drug dealer and you go to prison for 2 years or 5 years or 20 years, and you're not given any education or training, and you finally get out of prison, well, what are you going to do? You're going to go right back to your neighborhood and sell drugs because that's the only thing you know how to do. And so nothing is going to change. You know, why do the Germans and the Norwegians, for example, have recidivism rates of about 15%? And ours are 50%. They're the ones doing it right, where they put you not in a prison cell, but in a secure apartment with a kitchen, so you live like a human being, you know, and then go to school during the day or learn your skill. Now, we do have this thing called prison industries. There was a prison industry, I don't even know what to call it, company at my prison. They made fiber optic cable for the US Navy. Well, you know what? There's a private company that makes fiber optic cable for the US Navy. But if the prison is paying prisoners 10 cents an hour and the company's paying their people $20 an hour, whose fiber optic cable is the Navy going to buy? They're going to buy the prison fiber optic cable. But guess what? It's all degenerates and pedophiles and drug dealers and you know, people like this making the cable, and they don't give a shit if the cable works or not. It's not like what they're going to get a cut in pay from 10 cents an hour. And so these prison industries drive legitimate businesses out of business and then turn out substandard products for companies to buy. It's scandalous.
Right. Wow. Absolutely. What are some of the things I'm being presumptuous, but what are things you learned while in prison in retrospect? I'm sure you did a lot of analytical thinking, and what are some of the things that you really kind of focused on and feel like you learned during that time?
Well, none of it's good. Like I say, I wrote this book, Doing Time Like a Spy. What I found is, actually, it's the same conclusion that Professor Peter Moshes of John Jay College School of Criminal Justice wrote about in his book, In Defense of Flogging, which is it not to be taken literally, the title. He said that prisons in America are really nothing more than employment agencies for otherwise unemployable, uneducated white men. There's a reason why almost all of the country's prisons are in rural areas. It's because there's no other industry there. It's just farms or mines. And if you are, former military and you couldn't make a go of it, and you either flunked out of the local police academy or couldn't get into the local police academy in the first place, by God, there's a spot for you in the Bureau of Prisons. And so you get these guys. I met prison guards who literally could not read. They couldn't even read. And they're barking orders at people. And they're abusive. And one of the other things that I learned was, almost to a man, if you can get these prison guards to start talking to you, they'll tell you essentially the same story. They're losers who have nothing that they can do to make their lives better. Their parents, or at least their dads, were prison guards. In many cases, their grandfathers were prison guards, and they were bullied as children. And so now it's their turn. Now they're going to be the ones calling the shots. There was one guard who used to get in my face all the time. And finally I said to him, dude, you're going to spend way more time in this prison than I ever am. You're the one that should be thinking about changing your life.
How do you take that?
Not well. Not well. They always try to be Joe Tough Guy too. I can't tell you how many times they threatened me with solitary. And I said to one of them, I have gone nose to nose with Al-Qaeda, with Hezbollah, with the Iranians, and I'm supposed to be afraid of you? Please, give me a little credit. And then they always back off.
Did you have to ever do solitary?
No. They never had the guts. They never had I told them, I have lived in far worse places in the world than your solitary unit. I'm not afraid of your solitary. Besides, I could stand to lose a couple of pounds. I'm not afraid of your solitary. One of the Italians was talking to a guard. He was one of the notorious guards. He was the only one that wore a stab vest because he was afraid, because he knew he was such a dick. He was afraid people were going to try to stab him. So the Italian said, this guy went by the name Blue, the nickname Blue, and he always covered up his real name with a piece of masking tape. So he said, Blue, where are you going to be next quarter? And Blue said, oh, I'm going to be in the Central One housing unit. And he said, oh, my friend John's in Central One. Blue says, oh, the CIA guy? I never mess with that guy. And the Italian laughed and said, yeah, why not? And he said, because that's all I need. He said, I work my 8-hour day and then I go to my car and CNN's waiting for me. And I said, yeah, exactly. Jake Tapper came to the prison to interview me. I was on NPR 3 times. I was in The Economist and Playboy and People and Time magazine and the cover of The Week magazine. And I wasn't afraid of those guys. They were afraid of me. I actually filed a Freedom of Information Act request on myself with the Bureau of Prisons just to see, out of curiosity, what it was that they had. And they sent me back 220 pages, and 200 pages of it was just junk. It was my medical records and my visitors list and stuff like that. But 20 pages was clearly marked at the top and the bottom in red. It was stamped, FOIA exempt, do not release to inmate. So either somebody was so stupid at BOP headquarters, or they took pity on me and sent it to me on purpose. But it was these memos that the warden was sending out before I got there, warning the guards that I was coming. And the best memo, it wasn't even a memo, it was just like a flyer in these big block letters. It says, caution, inmate has access to the media. And that really set the tone for the whole 23 months. They would make their threats, and then I would make mine. You know, they would threaten me and I'd say, yeah, well, let's see what Jake Tapper has to say about it. How about that? Why don't we give him a call and see what he has to say? And then they would back off.
Did you have the ability to contact journalists, or did you have to wait till they contacted you?
No, that's a good question. So the Bureau of Prisons regulations, which I familiarized myself with the moment I arrived in prison, were very, very clear that prisoners have unlimited access to their attorneys and to the media. It's very, very specific. And in fact, even if you're in a communications management unit, or in my case, a modified communications management unit, which is supposed to restrict your access to the outside world, all you have to do is on the envelope, write legal mail exempt from exempt from inspection, or media mail exempt from inspection.
Oh.
And so journalists know this, right? So they would write to me and put on the envelope journalistic correspondence. And then I would respond and say journalistic exemption, media exemption. So yeah, I was in close touch with journalists when I was in prison. Close touch. The New York Times came, Scott Shane from the New York Times, Joby Warwick from the Washington Post. I told you Jake Tapper from CNN came. I gave 3 interviews to NPR. Ariana Huffington came with 2 young journalists. So I was talking to the media a lot.
I'm kind of surprised places like CNN wanted to talk to you, considering what you disclosed. They're usually not very anti-war.
No, they're not. They're very, very mainstream, very neoliberal, neoconservative. But Jake Tapper was different. Jake Tapper even asked President Obama in a press conference why he had insisted on prosecuting me when I exposed a crime. And Obama just walked away from the podium. So Jake was different. We've actually stayed in touch since I got home from prison. He was one of those guys that he told me he just thought it was wrong, and so he wanted to reach out and stay in touch. And I got that a lot. I got that from Scott Shane at the New York Times as well. Scott wrote to me all the time. And then Joby Warwick, both before I went to prison and after I got home, said the same kind of thing.
This is conjecture, but do you think if Obama was not elected that those charges would have been brought?
I do not. John McCain got up on the floor of the Senate 6 weeks before I got out of prison and said that I had provided the country with a great national service and that the country owed me a debt of gratitude. And then I was home from prison only a week or two, and I got a call from a guy from McCain's office saying, Senator McCain wants to know how he can be helpful. And I said, well, President Obama confiscated my pension, my federal pension. I had 20 years of proud, government service. I really would like my pension back. And McCain the plan was to put an amendment in the National Defense Authorization Act, and then he got brain cancer and died. So it never happened. But, the funny thing is I'm a lifelong progressive. I was a 3rd-generation Democrat. I'm no longer a Democrat. I think the Democrats are a war party, the same as the Republicans are. So I'm independent, like independent.
Same.
And, so I wasn't the natural McCain voter. I didn't vote for McCain, and I didn't vote for Obama either. But McCain saw this for what it was. It was a cover-up, and he wanted to help.
Wow, that's pretty incredible.
You never know where you're gonna find allies. This is something that I learned sort of later in life. You have to form strategic alliances with people with whom you might disagree. 90% of the time. I'll give you another example. I think that Fox News is the news channel of insanity. And I think that 90% of the time, Tucker Carlson has views that are repulsive to me. But by God, Tucker Carlson is right on this issue. And Tucker Carlson is right on Julian Assange. And I've been on his show a dozen times, and he can't possibly be more helpful to me than he has been. So you never know where you're going to find allies.
Yeah, absolutely. And, something that I've always talked about too is like, I've gone on shows with people I don't agree with, but I'm talking to their audiences too.
Exactly.
Like, we don't have the same audiences. So if you're passionate about something, everyone should be exposed to it. Talking to people who agree with you all the time is boring.
Because and what are you going to accomplish when you're just talking to people who already agree with you?
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm sure, I kind of forgot the obvious part. Let's talk about what you actually disclosed.
Sure.
And you were the first person in the CIA to acknowledge that waterboarding was in fact a thing.
Yes. President Bush had said several things that were just bald-faced lies. And I knew he was lying. He said that there was no torture program, period. If there was torture, he said it was the result of a rogue CIA officer. I knew that was just simply not true. And so, like I said, I waited 5.5 years for somebody to come out and say something, and nobody did. So I told ABC News and the New York Times 3 things. I said that the CIA was torturing its prisoners. I said that torture was official U.S. government policy. It was not the result of a rogue. And I said that the policy had been personally approved by the president himself. And so everything just kind of fell apart from there.
So they didn't, they took your word. They didn't ask for any kind of tangibles whatsoever. They just kind of took you at your word.
No, not really. I wish that I could say that, I was the first person ever to utter these words, but I wasn't. In the 2 years before I went public, the International Committee of the Red Cross issued a report saying the CIA is torturing people. Human Rights Watch came out with a report saying the CIA is torturing people. And Amnesty International came out with a report saying the CIA is torturing people. And so I came out and I said, they're right. The CIA is torturing people. Now, there was another whistleblower, and we've never learned who he or she is. I think I know who it is, but I'm not going to say. Who went public before I did to say we have a secret prison system, that there are prisons in 6 different countries around the world. Nobody is supposed to know about it, and they're so secret that in many cases, the leaders of those countries don't know that there are secret CIA prisons in their countries. These are handshake deals between the head of the CIA and the head of those countries' intelligence services, and their own elected officials don't know that they exist. So word was kind of already out there that there's some bad shit going down.
Seriously, wow. Do you ever kind of regret not coming forward sooner?
Oh, yes, all the time. I've thought about it from the very beginning. I should not have been as careful as I was. Now, there was one mistake I made. It was a very big mistake. I should have hired an attorney before blowing the whistle. I should have had that attorney sitting next to me when I blew the whistle. Instead, I was forced to be reactive. And I waited until I blew the whistle. The government fell on my head. And then I went out and got an attorney. That was a mistake. And I warn other whistleblowers or would-be whistleblowers, hire an attorney first. Have the attorney sitting next to you before you say anything. So that was a mistake. But otherwise, yeah, I should have done it sooner. I wish I had done it sooner.
Are there other things that you can share publicly that was going on within the CIA?
Well, there were several things that were going on in the CIA that I believed were all criminal activities. and they've all since been revealed. Of course, the obvious is the torture program. The other thing is the secret prison system. But one thing that we really haven't had a national discussion about is rendition and extraordinary rendition. There's a big difference between the two. Rendition is easy. Rendition is, let's say you are from Egypt. I'm just making this up. You're from Egypt. And so I catch you in Pakistan. A rendition is I send you back to Egypt. Now, they're not going to be very nice to you when you get back there, right? You're going to have a tough time. You may not survive that tough time, but they're going to do stuff that is clearly illegal. They're going to attach electrodes to your genitals. They're going to maybe rape your wife in front of you. They're going to do all different kinds of things. An extraordinary rendition is, again, let's say you're Egyptian and I catch you in Pakistan. An extraordinary rendition is I don't send you back to Egypt. I send you to Morocco or Israel or, Indonesia. And I don't tell representatives of your government that I have you and that you're in another country. Literally nobody knows where you are. Nobody. And you're probably not going to survive that either. That's an extraordinary rendition.
Wow. And just to clarify, this is if they find out you're in a country you shouldn't be in?
Yes, but it's very, very easy to make mistakes. We've made mistakes repeatedly. You may have heard of the case of Maher Arar. Maher was a political science professor at the University of Toronto. And he was originally Syrian. He was a naturalized Canadian citizen. And in the summer of 2001, he went to Syria to visit relatives. And he was there for about 3 months. He was there through 9/11. And then he was flying back to Toronto. Well, his flight, like most international flights going into Canada, stop at JFK in New York. So the FBI pulled him off that flight and they turned him over to the CIA. And the CIA sent him back to Syria and told the Syrians that this guy's Al-Qaeda. We want you to tenderize him a little bit. Well, in the meantime, his wife is waiting for him at the airport in Toronto and he never gets off the plane. So she calls the airline and the airline said, oh, he never got on the flight. Well, a month passes and he's just missing. Nobody's heard from him. And she gets a credit card bill. And it turns out that he bought a pair of sunglasses through duty free on the plane. You know how they come and say duty free, duty free,
right.
duty free, anybody? He bought a pair of sunglasses and it appeared on the credit card bill. So then she went to the Canadian government and she said he was on that flight. He landed in New York and then disappeared. Well, then the Canadians went to the CIA and they went to the FBI. And well, after 9 months, after he had undergone merciless torture at the hands of the Syrian intelligence service, the Syrians came back to us and said, listen, we think this is the wrong guy. There's another guy with a similar name, but it's not Maher Arar. And they let him go. Well, he finally makes his way back to Canada. He sues the U.S. government in the Eastern District of Virginia, here where I live. And the CIA goes to court and says, Your Honor, we can't defend this suit. National security. We would have to reveal classified information. Request that you dismiss the suit. The judge says, dismissed, national security. And that was it. So he sued the Canadian government because they did nothing to stop the CIA from snatching him. They did nothing to help their own citizen. And he won a $6 million settlement. But I spoke to him recently, and he told me that he has such severe PTSD from this episode that he hasn't left his house in 10 years. He's just unable to function. There's another guy by the name of Khalid al-Masri, German citizen. He had originally been Egyptian, and he was a greengrocer in Germany, in Munich, I think it was. And one night he had a fight with his wife. Their marriage was not good. He had a fight with his wife, and he said, I got to get out of here. Well, he had a brother in Macedonia. And so he gets on a bus. He's got this ticket to Macedonia, and he's going to go visit his brother. Well, the CIA intercepts a message that somebody named Khalid al-Masri intends to blow up the American embassy in Tirana, Albania. Now, Khalid is like John of the Middle East, right? Al-Masri just means the Egyptian. It's not even really a name. It just means Khalid the Egyptian. So there are like 10 million people with the name Khalid al-Masri. So the CIA is like, oh my God, this guy, Khalid al-Masri, he's going to blow up the American embassy in Tirana. And then they see, wait a minute, Khalid al-Masri is on a bus and he's heading in the direction of Albania. So we go to the Serbian intelligence service and we say, get this guy off this bus. And they stop the bus in the middle of nowhere. They take Khalid al-Masri off the bus. They turn him over to the CIA. The CIA sends him to Egypt. And we tell the Egyptian, this guy's Al-Qaeda. He's going to blow up our embassy. So go ahead and do what you guys do best. Well, a year and a half later, the Egyptians come to us and say, we think this is the wrong guy. It's a really common name. This guy doesn't know anything. He's a greengrocer. Well, by the time they released him with torture scars all over his body, he had a beard down to his waist. He's clutching a copy of the Quran, and all he wants to talk about is killing Americans. So that's the problem with the Extraordinary Rendition Program. It's a war crime.
Wow. So in other words, and I've heard other people say this as well, you believe that, new members of things like Al-Qaeda are created by people who are presumed part of them?
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah. I can't tell you. I was responsible for the capture of dozens and dozens of Al-Qaeda fighters, legitimate Al-Qaeda fighters. Most of them were not what you would expect. Most of them were 18 or 19 years old, crying through the entire interrogation, asking if they could call their mom, right? And they had no beef with the United States until we bombed their village. Until we sent a drone that killed their cousin or killed their dad or killed their sister, and then they wanted to make jihad against the Americans.
Sure. Wow.
Happens all the time.
Right. Wow. What are some of, the things that you learned being an intelligent officer that you have taken to apply in life as of now?
Oh,
what
yeah.
kind of lessons?
That's a great question. The most important lesson is education, 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 and economic development. Listen, every one of these guys told exactly the same story. They were from some isolated village in their country. Most of them were illiterate. They wanted to get married, but what man would want his daughter to marry some uneducated guy with no no job prospects? I wouldn't want my daughter to marry some uneducated, illiterate, jobless, homeless guy. And so the local imam told them, what are you doing here in this village? You should go to Afghanistan to make jihad against the Americans because we'll pay you $500 a month. And if you're martyred, we'll give your parents a $500 martyrdom bonus. You don't want to stay here. And then when you come home, you'll be a hero and then you can get a wife. And they were like, well, I got nothing else going for me. I might as well just go make jihad against the Americans. And then John caught them in some safe house someplace in Pakistan. So, one of the things I learned was if we were spending money, and I don't mean to sound like some airheaded, peacenik, I mean this sincerely. If we would spend some of the money that we spend on, so-called defense, which is really offense, on
Absolutely.
things like international education programs and economic development, digging water wells or building electrical grids or something to put these people to work and put them through school, then maybe we wouldn't have all these problems with terrorism. Mm-hmm.
And it's humorous when you were describing how they, lack of a better term, get people to join Al Qaeda. It kind of sounds like the same process as the army, honestly.
It's exactly the same process as the army, and I'll go one further. It's exactly the same process as the Bureau of Prisons. What do you want to do here? If you want to stay in this isolated, stupid village in the middle of nowhere, then at least you should come work for the prison. You can beat people up and hit them with your stick and kick them and send them into little cages and solitary confinement. And if the prisoners are women, you can rape them and nobody's going to rat you out. Come on, we'll have a lot of fun. It's the same idea.
Wow, absolutely. Well, I can't believe it's been an hour already. I feel like I could talk to you forever. Oh, and I'm supposed to tell you by one of my friends, we are in Pennsylvania as well. So she's excited that you're a Pennsylvanian.
Yeah, I am. Newcastle, PA. Where are you located?
I'm in Harrisburg.
Oh, okay, not far. I was in FCI Loretto, which is halfway between Altoona and Johnstown.
Right. That's awesome. We don't get many Pennsyltuckians that are that awesome. So
I'll tell you one funny thing. Somebody just for fun during COVID on Facebook, they made this post. Say something about yourself that is controversial and is generally not cool, something like that. And I wrote, all right, I'll admit I am prejudiced against Amish people. I am. I admit it. I grew up in a heavily Amish county, and they're just not very nice people.
Well, I mean, it's like I know I'm by Lancaster. I know. Right. I get it. I get it. Yeah. I mean, it's true. That is very true. What is something you would like the viewers to take away from this interview?
Oh, thank you for that. I would like them to take away something that I learned ex post facto. And that is that, at the CIA, and not just at the CIA, but in many organizations and at many points in life, our culture, our society wants us to believe that life is a shade of gray, or it's many shades of gray. And in many cases, that's just simply not true. Some things are black and white. They are right and wrong. At the CIA, they're not going to teach you morals. They're not going to teach you ethics. You have to go in with your own personal set of ethics. And you have to acknowledge that some things are black and white. They're either right or wrong. And if something is wrong, you've got to say something. You've got to say something. Nobody ever wants to be the first. Be the first. It's worth it. Your children will respect you, and you'll be able to sleep at night.
Absolutely. And I don't know how I forgot, but yeah, we got to say something about Assange. I know you're a huge supporter, and especially everything you've gone through. I know it upsets us, but I can't even fathom what it does to you to see what is happening to this man right now. So yeah, do you want to speak a little on why you're passionate about Assange and
the
importance
I'm very
of getting him out?
This case against Julian Assange is a very, very slippery slope. Whether you like Julian or not, whether you agree with Julian or not, you have to acknowledge that he is a journalist. And even if you don't agree that he's a journalist, you have to agree that he's a publisher. right? He exposed war crimes. Well, if Julian Assange, as a publisher, is prosecuted for espionage, for doing his job, and for exposing war crimes to the American people, then every journalist in America is going to be subject to an Espionage Act prosecution for doing his or her job. That is not what our founding fathers envisioned. It's not what the Constitution tells us. So we have to stand up for him. Let me add one other thing about Julian Assange. When Julian first was incarcerated at Belmarsh Prison, which is a maximum security penitentiary in South London, he would write me letters and he would say, do me a favor, call this lawyer and tell him that. Call this other lawyer and tell him this. Call this guy and tell him I need an article about that. And it was just a list of things to do. The last letter I got from Julian was one sentence long. And all it said was, please pray for me. They have broken him to the point where I'm not sure that he can survive this. So we've got to be militant in our determination to help Julian Assange. Not just for Julian, but for the Constitution's First Amendment.
Absolutely. Wow. That's heartbreaking. And please, also, we all need to stand by Stella, give her our support. She's talked about the boys the other day, and it was just absolutely heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking. It is.
So,
it's heartbreaking. Yes. I mean, that's a whole another hour conversation about what the CIA did to him in the Ecuadorian embassy and this nonsense. He's held in solitary confinement in Belmarsh, maximum security, for the last 3.5 years on a bail jumping charge. It's just outrageous.
Absolutely awful. Yeah, we definitely solidarity with Julian all the way. And also, why don't you give where people can find you, and also the exciting Assange event coming up?
Thank you, Joy. I'm on Substack, John KIRiakou, my full name. I'm also on Twitter and Facebook. But Substack is where I try to put everything. I just got back from Cuba a couple of days ago, and I've written a series about how U.S. policy is screwing the Cuban people too. On Sunday, this Sunday in Washington, is a big event, an anti-war event that, just by virtue of word of mouth, I think is going to be a very, very big deal. And then we had something called the Belmarsh Tribunal a few weeks ago about Julian Assange. It was held at the National Press Club. There's going to be a mirror event in Sydney, Australia on the 1st of March or 2nd of March, something like that. Anyway, big event in March. Follow Stella Morris on Twitter and Facebook. She has all the latest from Julian, and take to the streets.
Absolutely. That is so exciting. I'm looking forward to all your posts about that in Australia as well. That's so exciting. John, I cannot thank you enough. You've been on my top 5 list for like over a year.
Thank you very much.
Nice when I get to be like, yeah.
No, I appreciate the invitation very much. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you guys so much for watching. Smash the like button, smash subscribe. So thank you guys so much. Tune in Monday for another postmortem breakdown, and much love to everyone. Thanks again, John.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Bye-bye.